Hello and welcome to video lecture series in political science. Today we are going to discuss chapter 1 titled as Cold War from your class 12th political science textbook, Contemporary World Politics. For understanding, we have divided this chapter into 6 parts or sections. We have begun by general introduction to world politics and how world politics is different from international relations or international politics. We have discussed about the Second World War, attack on Pearl Harbor and dropping of atomic bombs by the US on Japan. We have discussed about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War and the concept of deterrence that avoided a full-scale war between the two rival blocs. We have also discussed about the establishment of NATO and the Warsaw Pact and how both these organizations divided the world into two power blocs. Today we will discuss about the emergence of two power blocs in detail. We will discuss about Iron Curtain and the influence of superpowers over the respective bloc or the countries aligning with them. Now, so far we have seen that after the end of Second World War, the world got divided between two rival blocs headed by the two superpowers, that is the US on the western side and the USSR on the eastern side. This East-West divide was on the basis of ideologies and alliance with the two power blocs. Now, the alliance or aligning with the two power blocs appeared first in Europe. The US and those who aligned with it were called as the part of Western alliances, or those together formed NATO. The NATO members on the west side, in contrast to the members on the east side, those who were bound together by the Warsaw Pact, and Warsaw Pact was called as the Eastern Bloc. Now, interestingly, Europe became the main arena of conflict between these two superpowers. The division also appeared on the geography or map of Europe. This divide between east and west of Europe is called as Iron Curtain. This Iron Curtain ran through the middle of Europe, dividing it clearly between the two rival blocs under the occupation of two superpowers. We have already discussed the difference between the two was grounded in the ideologies, the ideological war over the principles of capitalism or communism. And both of them advocated that capitalism or communism is the best form of socio-economic or political organization. Now, let us look at this map. This red line as shown in the map of Europe is the Iron Curtain. The countries on the eastern side are the part of Eastern Bloc or the Warsaw Pact, and the countries on the left hand side of this red line are part of the, not all of them, but most of them part of the NATO alliance, but they were part of the Western Bloc. Some of the countries were also neutral on the western side, but yet they were on the west side of the Iron Curtain. Now, if we look at this map, which shows in greater detail, this red line is the Iron Curtain that runs through the geography or the territory of Europe. And you can see the countries pink in color are the part of Union of Socialist Republic or under its influence, and the countries in green color are on the Western Alliance. Now, this map particularly is of great importance. This shows once again the red line shows the running of Iron Curtain from north to the south of Europe. But it is interesting to note that the continent of Europe and the nations within it got divided between east and west. But Germany particularly, if we talk of Germany, Germany got divided into East and West Germany. As you can see it in this picture, the red line runs through Germany, where the Eastern Germany is smaller in size, in structure or in terms of territory area, and West Germany being bigger part of it. Now, the darkest green is the territory gained by the USSR in the 1945. The middle green color is the countries which were under the control of the communist regime. And the darkest green is the Yugoslavia, that is the communist but independent, which was not part of it, and the red line is the Iron Curtain. The entire country was either on the right or left hand side of the Iron Curtain, but it was in the case of Germany that was the center or the epicenter of the Second World War that got divided between, Germany itself got divided between East and West, and we later on learn that how Germany got united when Iron Curtain fell. The term Iron Curtain had been used earlier as well, since the 19th century, but the term gained prominence only after it was used by the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Churchill, in a speech at Fulton, Missouri on 5th of March 1946, said that from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic Sea, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. It implied the divide between the east and west part of the Europe. In order to assert their superiority, the superpower were also continuously calculating their gains, and they were in a constant struggle to bring small states in their ambit. Because of the association with the superpower, the smaller states also got military help, they got promise of protection, weapons, equipment, and economic aid to counter local rivals within their own region, that is, the regional neighbors with whom they had competing and often conflicting or strained relations. Now, let us look at the formation or emergence of two power blocks. Europe was devastated by years of conflict during World War II. Millions of people were killed or wounded in the World War. The only major power in the world that was not much damaged because of the war was the US, the United States. It was geographically isolated and the center of the war was located in Europe. So, US enjoyed a distance. Industry and residential areas in most of the cities in Europe, particularly in England, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Belgium and elsewhere, were ruined. They were destroyed. Much of the Europe was on the brink of famine, as agricultural production had also been disrupted because of war. Infrastructure. Example, rail and road or transportation was in shambles. Now, officially known as European Recovery Program, ERP, the Marshall Plan was intended to rebuild the ruined economies of Western Europe primarily. It is known as Marshall Plan because of the name of the US Secretary of State, George C. Marshall. In 1948, Marshall issued a call for a comprehensive program to rebuild Europe. Marshall was convinced that the key to restoration of political stability of the world lay in revitalization of national economies of Europe. Further, Marshall saw that political stability in Western Europe is a key to counter the advancement of communism in this region. So, he advocated for an economic aid or package to Europe. This is called as Marshall Plan. Now, Marshall Plan nations were offered great assistance in their efforts for economic recovery after the damage or devastation of the World War. As a result of Marshall Plan or economic aid that was given to them, from 1948 up until the middle of the 1950s, European economies grew at an unprecedented rate. Their trade relations led to the formation of North Atlantic Alliance as well. So, all of them were working together with each other and within themselves to overcome the misery that the World War had caused to them. This economic prosperity came as a result of economic aid offered by the US called as Marshall Plan. This also led to the revival of coal and steel industry in Europe. With the revival of coal and steel industries, what happened? European Union, what we know as European Union today, came into existence. The number of European countries came together to help each other economically and to prosper together. In some cases, the aid given by the superpowers was economic in nature, and in some cases it was military in nature. For example, the Soviet Union used army in the Eastern Europe region to ensure that this region remains under the sphere of the influence of the Soviet Union only. The Soviet Union also had close relationships with China, Vietnam, North Korea and Iraq because they were also inclined towards the communist form of government. On the other hand, the US also intended to extend its sphere of influence, and in September of 1954, the US formed SEATO, that is Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. SEATO was formed along with France, Great Britain, New Zealand, Philippines, Thailand and Pakistan. The purpose of this organization was to prevent the spread of communism in these regions wherever the countries were coming from. Although the organization was called as SATO, that is Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, but only 2 Southeast Asian countries became its members. Despite being located at different geographical regions in the world, the other member countries like France, Great Britain, New Zealand, Philippines, they had their specific interest for joining this organization because they were being part of the Western Alliance where they had access to economic aid and other kind of facilities. Similar to NATO, that is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, another regional organization was established by the US bloc. This organization was called as CENTO, Central Treaty Organization. It is also known by many other names such as the Middle East Treaty Organization or Baghdad Pact in 1955. This was formed in order to counter the moves of the USSR in this region. CENTO was composed of Turkey, Iran, Pakistan and the United Kingdom. Until the March 1959, the organization was known as the Middle East Treaty Organization, including Iraq, with its headquarters in Baghdad. Now, like all other organizations, NATO, SATO, etc., CENTO committed the nation states or the member states for mutual cooperation and protection, as well as the policy of non-intervention in each other's affairs. That is, they'll cooperate with each other, they'll protect each other, but they'll not interfere in the internal matters or affairs of the member states or the member countries. CENTO was dissolved in 1979. Now, at this stage, one may question that the superpowers were already powerful because they had nuclear weapons with them and they had big armies. Then why did they need allies at all? Or for what reason they brought number of smaller countries within their own ambit? In fact, the superpowers were so powerful that they were more powerful than the combined power of most of the small states in Asia, Africa and even some of the countries of Europe. The smaller states together or individually were no match to or could not even think of competing with the power of the superpowers. We have already discussed that why did they align with the superpowers? Because they wanted some aid, economic, military or otherwise. But still, despite being so powerful, why did superpowers look for alliance? The answer is that the smaller states were helpful for the superpowers to have access to some important things. What were these important things? The first one is the territory. Territory where the superpowers can station their military equipment. They can install their weapons and troops to launch attack on the other. You remember, you have seen already the location of Cuba very near to US, where Russia or the USSR had installed nuclear missiles. The second important reason is that smaller states gave them access to vital resources. They got vital resources from smaller countries in return of the security from the regional rivals. The superpower gave them protection and the smaller states gave them access to resources such as oil, mineral, raw material, etc. The superpowers also got access to the location or the territory from where they could secretly keep an eye on the movement of the other superpower. The need to strengthen the sphere of influence was important from the ideological reason as well, or the ideological perspective as well, because the growing number of allies and their loyalty was an indicator that a particular superpower was winning the war of ideology. On one hand, it showed that the liberal democracy and capitalism were better than socialism and communism in the US dominated areas. And the opposite is true in the Eastern Bloc, that is, communism and socialism are better than democracy and capitalism. Both the powers were helping and supporting nations economically, militarily and otherwise in order to gain their loyalty and spread their sphere of influence. But despite all this help given to each other, there were general tensions prevailing all over the world. The Cuban Missile Crisis is one such example of several crises that occurred during the Cold War. Both the superpowers were flexing their muscles. They were trying to show their might, military might to each other at the same time in different regions of the world, and they were also building their military capacity constantly, secretly also and openly as well. During the Cold War era, quite a number of small military wars or conflicts happened world over. They were supported by both the superpowers, or they were backed by, in the sense that superpowers were giving them money, military equipment and troops as well to fight these wars in the regions wherever they were occurring. But fortunately enough, none of these smaller wars became or led to another world war. To conclude, let's summarize what we discussed in this episode. Today, we discussed about the division of world into Eastern and Western bloc. We discussed about the Iron Curtain that ran through the Europe and divided Europe into East Europe and West Europe. The division on the basis of the ideologies held by both the superpowers and how they divided countries of Europe into two different sets. We also discussed about the moves made by USSR and the counter moves made by the US. We discussed how Marshall Plan helped in the recovery of shattered European economy after the Second World War. And we discussed about why did small states align with superpowers and what did superpowers get in return of their protection that they are giving to the smaller state from the smaller states. In the next part of this chapter, we will discuss about Vietnam War and Afghan invasion by the Soviet Army. And we will also discuss about some of the treaties and agreements between the two superpowers and other nuclear countries to ban use of nuclear weapons. Till then, you can enjoy reading this part of the chapter. Thank you.